The iMore Show is brought to you today by Betterment, the automated investment service built on the idea that investing intelligently should be intuitive, automated, and accessible to everyone, whether you have a $10,000 or $10 million. For a limited time, listeners can get up to 6 months of free automated investment managing by visiting betterment.com/iMore. It is Thursday, July 3rd, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to talk all about iPhone, iPad, and Mac, and a little bit of news about iMore. Imagine that. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, I have the managing editor of iMore.com, Mr. Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
I am doing well, Rene, thank you. I am a little bit steamy today, so excuse my sweaty visage, but how are you doing?
You are New England Lobster Red, sir.
Yes, I am. I am pink as a baby. It's a little crazy today.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, we were talking before the show that it's hard to podcast with air conditioning or fans on, so Peter turned his off. I recorded Vector with Anand from AnandTech earlier, and I've had mine off for about 3 or 4 hours now, and I feel like a steamed dumpling.
Yes, indeed. I love steamed dumplings. So don't talk about food.
We won't talk about food. We will talk about, I have a couple quick announcements to make. We'd intend to do it this week. Peter reminded me, but I totally forgot. We are going to be moving the iMore Show to earlier in the day. If you watch us on YouTube, if you listen to us on iTunes or via RSS, there will be absolutely no difference to you, except you might get the show a little bit earlier in the day. But if you watch us live, which is absolutely the best way to watch us, it'll be 2 hours earlier. So it'll be 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, whatever the world clock tells you in your part of the world. It's the same time of the day as Mac Break Weekly on Tuesdays. It just means we'll be able to get the show up a little bit earlier for everybody, and I can keep a little bit of a more consistent schedule. And Peter, if he wants to, can have a nap later in the day.
Excellent. I was saying to a friend of mine before that the nice thing about being an adult is it's kind of like kindergarten. You can have nap and cookies, and you can kind of pick your time. So it works out well for everyone.
And you can have the sugary cereal that your mom would never let you have.
That is true. That is true. There are some benefits to living on your own. I hope my teenagers are listening.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention is we just today launched the beta, the preview version of the iMore Editor's Choice app gallery. Now, it's the iOS version. We will be having a Mac version soon, but we wanted to test the platform before we launched it. And I'm really excited about this because what it is, and we've done, best iPhone apps, best iPad apps. We have pages with tons. Ali has just knocked those out of the park. Tons and tons of best app roundups. But we wanted a way to sort of single out those apps that we thought were really worthy of your attention. So we had these topic pages, things that we've been using for like iPhone 5S or iOS 7, stuff like that, and we made an app-specific version. So they're a little bit different. They have the apps icons, you can recognize it. They have the App Store description, an easy button to download or buy it, a small review for the app, and then it concentrates all of the stuff we've written about it, reviews and how-tos and articles in general. But the really cool thing is you can go to any app in the app gallery and click a recommend button, and your iMore, your Mobile Nations avatar will show up there to show everybody that you recommend that app as well. And the editors can recommend apps, so you'll know that if Peter likes an app, or I like an app, or Ali likes an app, and how many of us like it. And Peter, the goal of this, I think, is with 1 million apps, is just untenable. So we want to take 100, maybe a couple hundred max, and just really tell people the best ones.
Well, look, I post, new app and app update roundups every day. And even there, we're cherry picking a lot of the stuff that we cover compared to the fire hose of information that comes in the door. But we've got to have some way of providing meaningful a meaningful way of letting you guys who are watching and listening know what we think is the best of the best, and this lets us do that. So to that end, I am so happy that it's finally here.
Yeah, and again, the iOS version launched first just because if there's any bugs, we want to fix those out before we unleash Peter on the Mac Store version, on the Mac app version.
Yes.
But that is absolutely coming, and it's built on the same platform that the Crackberry app gallery is built on. Eventually, there'll be Android Central ones, Windows Phone Central ones. So we want to make sure we get it right. So here's where we need your help. If you go to imore.com/ios/best-apps, and I'll put that in the show notes, you'll see we have about 50 in there for now. We have about 100 we want to get in there, but the other 100 are really up to you. We want to see your recommendation. So there's a post on the front page of iMore right now. It'll be in the banner by the time this podcast goes live. We want you to get in there. We want you to vote on which app. We want you to recommend apps, and we want you to tell us what apps you want to see in the gallery, because ultimately that gallery is for you. It's for everyone who reads iMore or who listens or watches to the podcast, and we want to make the absolute best app resource in the world, because nobody can put a million apps on their smartphone. It's ridiculous. And the other problem, Peter, and we've talked to developers about this, is if it's a crowded category, nobody knows which one to buy, and we don't want people wasting $20-30 trying every app if they don't have to.
Absolutely not. God, we don't want to spend $20-30 on wasted apps if we don't have to. So why should anybody else? So yeah, absolutely. Know what you're going, know what absolutely is the best in every category, and go with that. And maybe use that as a starting point. More and more apps are available for free download with in-app purchases. You never know. But some stuff still costs money, and you want to know how to spend your money wisely. This is what we're doing for you.
All right, so again, I'll have all that in the show notes, but it is the Editor's Choice App Gallery, and I'll link to it from the menu. So in other news, Peter, we concluded the iMore show last week. We thought we were good and done. We thought, end of the news cycle, like on the West Wing when CJ can finally go back to her office and take a couple shots and, drown her sorrows. But Friday morning, we woke up and Apple issued a statement on Aperture.
Apple issued a statement on Aperture, and this is big news. Apple ended up telling Jim Dalrymple over at The Loop that iPhotos and Aperture are both end-of-life products. They're products that are going to be discontinued in favor of Photos, which Craig Federighi showed on stage at WWDC at the beginning of June. Now, Photos is a new photo app that does cataloging and lets you do image retouching, and it's going to have a lot of the same features that both iPhoto and Aperture have, but it's still kind of a big question mark. We don't really know what exactly it's going to have. So, the pro photographers who have invested a lot of time and a lot of effort into building Aperture libraries are kind of scratching their heads now going, wow, what are we going to do? Of course, Adobe sees it as a selling opportunity for its Lightroom product, which you can get with Photoshop as part of the Photography Creative Cloud subsection for $9.99 a month. So, if you're looking to jump ship from Aperture, that's one option. There are others as well. I talk about them in a recent editorial. The bottom line, though, is that Aperture is going to work at least through the next OS cycle. So when OS 10 Yosemite comes out later this year, it's going to continue to support Aperture. So there's no need to do anything right now, and that's exactly what I plan to do. Absolutely nothing. Goose egg. I'm just going to sit on it for now.
Are you an Aperture user, Peter?
It's funny. Way back in the day when Aperture first came out, I was actually an Aperture trainer. I knew how to train people to use Aperture, and so I've used it for a very, very long time. And I know that Apple hasn't always supported it maybe as robustly as Aperture users wanted. So it didn't come as an entire surprise to me that Aperture was going to go away, but it's still unfortunate when Apple puts an app that people have invested a lot of time and effort into developing a professional workflow around and make it go bye-bye.
So there's a couple things I'd like to unpack this, because I think you and I both talked about this a couple of days ago. There is a fair amount of analysis going on here. Some of it is verging on the FUD. I think some of it is taking it too lightly. But I am an Aperture user. I've been an Aperture user for several years. I plan on doing the same thing that you plan on doing, quite frankly, but maybe for different reasons. But I think the one point that you said that's really worth noting here is that nobody is coming to your house and uninstalling Aperture from your Mac. The Pro or iPhoto, the Aperture and iPhoto you have today are going to keep working today, tomorrow, when OS 10 Yosemite launches this fall, and into early next year, and probably beyond that too, because Apple's not going to make any big changes until the next version of OS 10, most likely. So you absolutely, if you want to be like Peter and me, you absolutely can keep using Aperture and iPhoto as much as you want through the holidays into next year without a problem.
Absolutely, and beyond. I mean, first of all, there's nothing saying that you've got to download OS 10 Yosemite the day it comes out. But if you are like us and you like to be an early adopter, there you go. The bottom line is OS 10 Yosemite is going to have a 1 year product cycle, just like the last few operating system upgrades have had. So that's a cycle that Apple's committed to. It's something that it keeps doing. Hopefully, we'll see Apple continue that in the future. There's nothing making you either upgrade to Yosemite when it comes out or upgrading away from Yosemite when OS 10 Stockton or whatever comes out afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think the other thing to consider is how you use what. Now, there absolutely are people who are professional photographers. I am not one of them. I use Aperture just because, I have this really fragmented approach to photo managing. I use iPhoto because it lets me just drag photo stream files. I take a ton of screenshots. Anyone who does reviews of Apple products takes tons of screenshots, especially on iOS devices. Those go straight into PhotoStream. I drag them from PhotoStream either to my desktop or to Photoshop to work on. And iPhoto is the easiest thing to do. That is all I do with iPhoto. It's basically a giant PhotoStream buffer for me. I use Aperture. I have a DSLR, sorry. I have a Canon camera. I take out the SD card, I plug that in. That goes into Aperture because, I don't know why. Aperture was the tool I used back then because iPhoto just really wasn't that capable when I started using Aperture. And most of the time, I'm embarrassed to say, Peter, my actions in Aperture consist of right-clicking and saying Edit in Photoshop.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Aperture does fine with an external editor. I mean, Aperture's main goal isn't even editing. It's really at cataloging and advanced metadata management to help you organize your catalogs better. And non-destructive editing. That's one really cool thing about Aperture. If you want to make changes to your photo, but you don't actually want to make changes to your photo, you can make all those adjustments in Aperture and actually take up very little space compared to the original image. So that's always been one of Aperture's strengths. Aperture has a few weaknesses too. Aperture doesn't work very well with machines with limited amounts of memory, or even most stock memory machines in Apple's portfolio have trouble with Aperture after you really start hammering on it. Aperture on my Mac Pro didn't start working right until I bumped it up with about 12 gigs of RAM. I've got 16 in my Retina MacBook Pro, and it can handle Aperture just fine. But I'm also pretty judicious about what I keep in different libraries. So, Aperture has its strengths and has its weaknesses. The fact that you do open up Photoshop to do your further editing in, though, is telling because Adobe, of course, has a competing program called Lightroom. Lightroom is popular. Lightroom is more popular than Aperture for sure. And it's because Adobe has that ecosystem to work with, and Photoshop was already a part of so many pro photographers and prosumers and serious hobbyists, already part of their workflow. That made a very natural transition for people to use Lightroom. But still, there are a fair number of people who love Aperture and continue to use it, myself and yourself included.
Yeah, and for me, I use it. All my PhotoStream photos are in iPhoto, just because it handled it better at the time, and all my DSLR photos are in Aperture, just because it handled it better at the time. And I use Photoshop because I've been using Photoshop for decades. I grew up using Photoshop. It's muscle memory to me now. I used to do special effects retouching on photos. I'm just really, really fast at using it. So, I should maybe have learned Aperture because maybe there are some things that are better. But I feel the same thing, Peter. Lightroom followed Aperture, and Photoshop always had this sort of split personality because photographers would use it, interface designers would use it, graphic designers would use it. It was sort of a jack of all trades, and we had the Photoshop team on the Iterate podcast a couple weeks ago, and they told us they're steering Photoshop more towards design now because Lightroom can pick up the photography thing. I've used Lightroom. I shot WWDC with Lightroom because Phil Dickinson was nice enough to show me his tethering workflow, and it worked really well, and I didn't have time to figure it out in Aperture. But the tab interface, the way it has those steps sort of to do it, it doesn't suit my right-click, open in Photoshop personality very much. So I like the fact that we have these options, but I think there's a huge opportunity for Apple, and it's something that I've written about a lot, and I know you wrote about it in context of iWork recently, And that is, when you look at iMovie, when you look at Final Cut Pro, when you look at iWork, Apple has been willing to take a huge hit in terms of professional, bleeding edge professional usage to encompass more of the 80% of the people who want to do most of the stuff with most of their photos. And I think that's the opportunity with Photos app. I think it's telling that I use both iPhoto and Aperture and that neither of them are perfect for what I want to do. I'm really interested to see if the Photos.app is better, if it gives me the ability to catalog stuff better and do sort of quick adjustments better, if it does work better with iOS. Because, yes, iWork was a step backwards in that they ported the iOS engine over to OS 10 and are now rebuilding. But this Photos app is going to ship with iOS 8 now and is going to come to Yosemite this fall, and it could work so much better as sort of a combined experience.
Well, one point I'd like to emphasize when it comes to Photos is that we don't know the full depth and breadth of Photos feature set yet. We don't know exactly how it's going to work compared to iPhoto or Aperture. As far as iPhoto is concerned, I've got to say that whatever they've got up their sleeve is going to be better than what they have now, because no knock on iPhoto. iPhoto works for a lot of people, but once you kind of grow outside of iPhoto's abilities, iPhoto becomes unusable very, very quickly. That cliff where it just becomes unusable is very steep and comes up on you very quickly. So I think that whatever Apple is going to replace iPhotos with or iPhoto with is going to be better. Aperture, it's a different question. One thing that worries me a little bit is that Federighi, in introducing the software at WWDC, said that Photos is being built ground up for iCloud users. And that suggests to me that, first of all, Apple is going to be looking at iCloud as the revenue stream through which Photos can help bring Apple money. But secondly, that also suggests to me anyway that Photos is going to have more of an emphasis on cloud-based storage and less of an emphasis on local storage. That could be good or bad. That's always felt kind of grafted on in iPhoto and in Aperture. A truly integrated, elegant online workflow would certainly help people who do a lot of photography on their Macs. But where I'm worried about is, if you're an existing Aperture user and you've got libraries and you've got tons of adjustments and metadata fixes and stuff like that, how is all that going to translate over to Photos going forward? So there are still some questions that need to be answered, but right now it isn't overt cause for concern.
Yeah, no, I agree with that absolutely. And as a consumer, I don't want to make a decision on staying with Aperture and iPhoto, moving to Lightroom, or moving to Photos until I actually have all those products in front of me, can see what they offer, what they don't offer, and actually try them out myself to see how they fit my needs.
Exactly right.
I'm ill-suited for the internet, Peter.
Yes, I think so too. Not about you, about myself.
So we have a couple questions. Disturbed Angel wants to know, as things change, does iOS 8 solve picture memory management in the changes to iCloud? I.e., are all the pictures moved to the cloud, or does it still have the picture on your device twice as it's currently? I guess that's because when you look at iOS 8, and maybe when you see it on the Mac, I'm not sure, you see it in both the camera roll and you see it in the photo stream. And if you have saved that, presumably from like iMessage or an email, it's also in the email, it's also in the iMessage. I believe they did talk a little bit about deduplication, that they are managing it intelligently, that it will keep some amount local and some amount nearline or online. But I don't think they've given very specific details yet, Peter.
Okay.
And my guess is that we will have to have all of this stuff in hand and try it out and see, because it really is complicated. Apple, in a perfect world, could have one copy of the photo on iCloud, store the recent ones locally, the ones that you're most commonly using, sort of how they do a Fusion drive, where they move the most commonly accessed stuff to an SD, to a solid-state drive, and keep the rest on a hard drive. But if it's in Messages, they have an expiry system where it automatically deletes itself after a few days unless you tell it to keep it. But if you tell it to keep it, I don't know if it's stored locally or on the cloud. There are questions, Peter, questions that need answers.
Questions that need answers. Questions about Aperture, questions about this. We are just bundles and bundles of questions today.
We are Gandalf before he went to find out about the ring.
That's right.
Another question from Nilesh. Will Apple release photos for iCloud in 2015? I think they said spring 2015.
Yes, indeed. They said early next year, actually, as opposed to spring. So hopefully, the sooner the better, I think.
So one of the other things that came up, Peter, is there was immediate panic that Apple was going to do this with Final Cut Pro 10 and Logic Pro 10 as well. And Jim also stated in his piece that Apple assured him, and no one assures Jim Dalrymple lightly, that that was not the case, that those products are under active development.
True enough, yeah, indeed. So we don't need to worry about Final Cut Pro or Logic or Apple's other professional apps from getting cut. But of course, photographers will look at you wryly and say, "Sure, as long as it makes sense for Apple to continue them." But as soon as it doesn't make sense for Apple to continue them, they'll be shown the door. It's I don't even know what to say about that. There is a point to be made there, but Final Cut Pro and Logic are such mainstays of their respective industries. I don't think that Apple could get out of doing that without creating a huge problem for itself.
So Peter, in an alternate universe, then, I mean, Andy Nocco, mutual friend Andy Nocco on MacBreak was asking if Apple needs to be in any of the professional spaces. Do they need to make Final Cut Pro? Do they need to make Logic Pro 10? Do they need to even make iWork, for example? Or can they leave that to the Adobes, the Avids, and the Microsofts of the world now?
I think they do a really good job with it. They do a better job in those categories than some of those companies with some features, and certainly have entire legions of professionals who are very dependent on their products. So I can't foresee Apple getting out of that. As long as they're making products like the Mac Pro, as long as they're making products like the MacBook Pro, as long as they are orienting these products around creative professionals, I think they're going to have to offer serious tools for creative professionals.
The interesting thing to me is trying to figure out if this means that photos are taken less or more seriously. And what I mean by that is, we've spoken previously about the halo effect of iOS devices on Macs, and this could be because Apple considers photos so important that they are doing this ground-up rewrite of both iPhoto and Aperture into this Photos app, so you get this unified experience across iOS and OS X, and very much what they did with iWork. But the pessimistic point of view is that Apple considers movie making and audio making much more important than photos because they're keeping around the pro-level apps.
Well, I think photos can exist quite comfortably without an Apple Pro level app. Apple's not making Aperture anymore because it doesn't make sense for Apple to make Aperture anymore, which tells you something about what Apple itself thinks of the pro photo market when it comes to its own software. So infer from that what you will. But yeah, I mean, Hollywood is very dependent on Apple products, and Apple products are used broadly throughout video production, so there's no danger of Final Cut Pro going away. Apple software and hardware is used extensively throughout music and audio production. Same goes for Logic and all of the other ancillary tools that float around them.
So 2 years ago, I wrote an article called Power versus Empowering, where I posited that Apple didn't care about, not that they didn't care about power users, but they cared about empowering users far more, that they weren't devoted to servicing the needs of the top 5 or top 10%, but by making computing more accessible to the 80 or 90% of other people who previously found it intimidating or inaccessible. And then Apple decided to punch me around a little bit by a couple months later announcing the new Mac Pro, announcing all the power user features in Mavericks, like desktops and Finder tabs and all those things. But I wonder if it is a dichotomy, or if there is a simpler answer that Apple will care for power user features where it makes sense, but as a whole, they're still focused on democratizing computer technology and making it more accessible.
I think that there's something to be said for that, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with Apple taking that approach to it. The danger of course, is Apple dumbing it down, right? That's what we're always concerned about, that Apple's going to dumb down something that we like because it's exclusive. Why the hell is that a problem for anybody? Things should be dumbed down in some respects, and where it counts, Apple doesn't dumb anything down. I don't think that any developer could accuse Apple of dumbing down programming by introducing Swift, for example, as a replacement for Objective-C, or as something.
It's called a playground, Peter. How dumb is that?
Right, exactly. Playground, right. So I guess, yes, we are infantilizing everything. Soccer is leading to this nation's downfall. Arr!
You don't have to watch soccer again for 4 years, right?
That's true, and it's amazing. It's amazing to me as an American who watches television how quickly World Cup fever faded after the United States got eliminated. I made no secret of my ambivalence about soccer, and I'm sorry for anybody that offends. It's just simply true. I don't want to play the role of the ugly American, but whatever.
If the ugly American mask fits, Peter.
Exactly. Then I shall wear it proudly.
We're going to take a quick break so I can tell you about Igloo. igloosoftware.com/iMore. Now, Peter, I think I've told you in the past about my nightmarish days as a SharePoint administrator.
Yes, indeed, and I have lit a candle for you in concern over that.
Yeah, people still yell document and I dive under a desk. It's horrible, but we don't live in that time anymore. We live in a time where there are options, and there are good options, and one of those is Igloo. And one of the things that they're showcasing right now is task management. They're bringing task management into the intranet. What do you need another task management system for? How's it going to help you get work done? Well, consider this. All the tasks you do that aren't part of specific projects, updating a graphic in a presentation, requesting text changes in a Word document, delegating to-dos after a meeting, Igloo makes this easy. They do that by keeping these kinds of tasks directly with your content. You don't need a project or a specific task list, but you can use those too. Content tasks inform your team if document needs edits or if it's ready to go to a client. They're particularly great for recurring meetings, like you view everything talked about in last week's meeting. It's easy to see what was completed and what wasn't. The tasks are right there. And when you're the one assigned tasks, whether it's on a project list or a content or a personal task, they all show up in one view. It's the easiest way to manage your day-to-day work. I've joked, Peter, I've called task management the gym memberships of apps.
Okay.
Well, because people get them to feel better and then they don't use them. It's almost like the act itself makes you feel like you've accomplished something. You don't have to follow through with it.
Okay. All right.
And there's so many of them. There's just so many ways, and the worst of them take more time from you. They make managing your task into a task that needs management.
I see what you're saying there.
All right, so the nice thing about Igloo is that they don't do that. They make it really easy, and best of all, it's free to all Igloo customers. Coming this summer as part of Igloo's latest update, Unicorn. And you can learn all about Unicorn if you go to igloosoftware.com/iMore. I want to thank you for supporting. Sorry?
We always joke about, the unicorns that are, the unicorns in hardware and software, especially when we talk about Mac products, or Apple products. So it's good to see somebody taking that seriously and doing real unicorn stuff now.
Yeah, you can get an actual software update called Unicorn. And if you want to learn more about it, just go to igloosoftware.com/iMore. I want to thank them for supporting the show, and I want to thank you for supporting them. All right, Peter. So as much as it seems like Aperture was not the only news this week.
Nope.
The sort of thing that's interesting to me right now is that we've had WWDC, we've had all these announcements, we're working our way through all the features that were announced both for Yosemite and for iOS, and Peter and I have been going through all of them step by step. And the one thing that stuck out to me, and I spoke to you about this briefly yesterday, is extensibility. And one of the things I noticed in the Photos app is it said that it was going to allow for plugins. And then I was watching the session videos, and anybody can watch the WWDC session videos this year. You just go to developer.apple.com. And it looks like the structure that they made for action extensions is interesting on iOS. You can do stuff like have Bing translate your website from Japanese to English immediately. You can have 1Password fill in your Safari logins. But the extensibility structure for OS X struck me as really powerful. And what I didn't know, and I don't know if it was clear from the keynote, do you remember that markup thing they showed inside Mail?
Yes.
That's an extensibility hook. That's actually in almost everything. Anywhere where you have a picture, you can use that markup thing.
Yeah, now for people who haven't watched the video or may have forgotten, markup is a really cool feature that they showed as part of OS 10 Yosemite's updated Mail app. And the idea is that people frequently attach files, images, or other kinds of files to the emails that they're sending people, and now you're going to be able to actually make some inline changes to the pictures to draw people's attention to specific things. So, like, let's say, for example, it's a photograph. You can use a loop, a magnification loop, to zoom in on a particular part of the photo. You can actually draw an arrow with your finger that the software will clean up to make it look a little bit crisper, a little bit better. You can type in text. You can create dialogue bubbles. So you can create funny pictures if you want to. You can do mock-ups. You can do all sorts of stuff with it. And it's very interesting in how it's implemented in Yosemite, indeed.
And so the thing that I was wondering, and just when I said it's not all about Aperture, is I went right back to Aperture. This architecture, do you remember, like, well, of course you remember, but Apple never made a Photoshop clone. Instead, they made core graphics and core animation and things like that, and people like Gus Mueller made Acorn, and other people made, the one I'm blanking on right now?
Pixelmator.
Pixelmator, yeah. I just had Gruber's Pixelmator stuck in my head for a second. I wonder if this sort of plugin architecture could let, maybe not Nick Software anymore because Google owns them, but could let people who are really good at making photo features and photo functionality create things that take Photos.app from sort of a mainstream application to something that is more appealing to higher end users.
I think it's possible, and I think that that's a good explanation of how Apple likes to work these things. Apple loves to incorporate technology into its core operating system that enables developers to do really interesting things with it. You know, within OS 10, you've got core image, you've got core video, you've got core audio, and these are the frameworks from which developers can do really cool things, like build audio units that end up getting plugged into digital audio workstation software. So you can do really cool effects, or you can do really cool editing that you couldn't do otherwise. And it just makes sense for Apple to do that, because Apple's just facilitating the creation of very cool things that work with core operating system technology, as opposed to requiring developers to sort of implement end-to-end workflows out of whole cloth, and then, you know, creating problems when it comes to integration with other software.
I like it that it's a virtuous cycle, that they give developers the tools that gives them a lot of functionality for free. Like, for example, they can use default view controllers if they want to. They can get all sorts of sharing functionality if they want to. They get hooks into all sorts of things. But at the same time, that empowers developers to make features that make iOS better. And going back to extensions, like the new share extensions, previously in iOS, and I'm guessing OS 10, Apple had to come to agreements with, for example, Facebook and Twitter to add social sharing features. Now, and they use Pinterest as an example, Pinterest can just make an extension, and the extension is separate and secure and private, but it's suddenly iOS and, you know, maybe OS 10 can share to Pinterest natively, so you don't have to go to Pinterest, go to the website, link it in. No matter where you are in Safari, you don't have to use a bookmarklet anymore. You just click the action, say the share button, pull down the activity view, hit the button, and you're done. And the actions are the same thing. You don't have to, you know, Automator is not hard, but it's still probably something that's not on most people's radar. Like, I know it's not on most of my family, may not have even heard of it. But these kinds of actions, I think, because you can expose them in toolbars on OS 10. You say show toolbar, and the actions pop up on your toolbar. I think that's another example of them mainstreaming these kinds of technologies.
Sounds right, yeah.
All right, so now we can move on from Aperture. Sorry, I had a little relapse there. Apple put out their third in their series of powerful commercials for iPhone 5S. The first one was actually called Powerful, and it was set to gigantic, and showed, you know, a bunch of sort of creative stuff that you could do with the iPhone. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. The second one was all about fitness and fitness trackers and things like that, and it was set to chicken fat, Peter. I don't know if we ever talked about it, but I thought that was not a good match for that commercial.
Chicken fat was traumatizing to an entire generation of fat kids who grew up in the '60s. So that chicken fat seemed to upset a lot of boomers, for one thing. People who are younger than that, people who are your and I age, I don't think it really connected that much, and so the rest of us just kind of found it a curiosity.
Yeah, and yeah, so that I mean, I like the visual style. They're going for very human. I mean, the original iPhone ads were someone holding an iPhone, tapping you, and basically showing you how to use the internet communicator in your pocket. And then when the App Store came around, it was app for that. They just started showing off a bunch of apps you could do things. And my favorite commercial still is the iPad 2 one with Peter Coyote called "We Believe," where he said that technology alone is not enough. And I always think Apple is at its best when it's telling you a very human story about how the devices change lives. And I think Powerful was creative but didn't really do that. I thought Chicken Fat, it showed the fitness stuff, but the song was such a disconnect that it didn't really accomplish anything. I like this new one. The new one is called Strength, I think. And it's the music matches, and it's called Parenthood. The music matches. It shows kids brushing their teeth, a father, cuddling his baby, kids doing flashcards over FaceTime. It shows how an iPhone device. I guess the cynical view on this is Apple wanting to sell more iPhones, of course, but it does show how technology removed from Apple doesn't have to be a distraction, doesn't have to get in the way of human relationships, but can be used to better connect people.
I think that's a very generous way of looking at it. Of course, the paranoid person looks at that and says, "So Apple wants to be in every corner of your life, dominated. Your kids can't even brush their teeth without their iPhones in front of them." Yeah, there's something to be said for that. As the parent of three teenagers, we sort of have a relationship completely based on mutual contempt. So, I of course think my kids use their devices too much, but your mileage may vary, parents. I'm not judging you, I'm judging myself.
But I think on age too, and I absolutely agree with that. And my godchildren are almost never allowed to play video games or watch television. So when they do, they treat it as something really special, and they do things like they use Duolingo to learn a new language. They're learning French and Italian, or they do some of the math quizzes or some of the letter quizzes. One of their favorite things, though, is to when they go on vacations and stuff, is to take movies and pictures and then edit them in iMovie and make little sort of trailers that they can show their family when they come home. And I know a friend of mine has her kids go around and photograph things in the yard, like whether it's bugs or fossils or leaves, and then they make either an iPhoto photo book, which we don't know whether that's going to survive the transition or not, going back to that again, or an iBooks author book. And those sort of things, I think, can, just like when I was a kid, my mom gave me paper, pencil, and glue and scissors, it can let you create almost crafts, almost sort of project kind of stuff that I think is very interesting.
Indeed, yeah, the whole digitization of the craft experience.
Yeah, and an iPod Touch, we talked about this last week, it starts selling now for $200, which is expensive, but it's not prohibitively expensive anymore. And if a family has an iPad, or if you let a child use your iPhone to do some of this stuff, I think it's interesting what you could produce. Andy Anako on MacBreak showed off this app called Rookies, that you take photos of your kids, or of anything actually. I'm sure he took photos of the X-Men, knowing Andy. You can actually send away for a wax-wrapped pack of cards for your Little League team, for your family, for your podcast crew, for anything. And that to me is interesting, because that's something that there was no way to properly do that in the past.
That's nice. That's it's cool when stuff like that pops up.
So I don't have anything else much to say about that, but I do think that this is a really interesting way for them to advertise the iPhone. The only thing I did notice is that the iPad ads have been quiet for a while. They are doing the Verse ads. I don't think the Verse ads have been as effective as the iPhone ads. I think I forget, I saw a report that said the ad with a conductor in Scandinavia didn't particularly well resonate. It might be very high concept, but also we haven't seen Mac ads, I think, for a long time.
We haven't seen Mac ads for a long time, but then again, we're in kind of a weird point in the product cycle. The Intel is dragging its heels on getting Broadwell out in the world. So Apple doesn't really have a lot of new hardware to show off, and it's not going to until later this year. So is Apple going to try to give its hardware sales on the Mac side a bump between now and then? I don't know. Maybe if Apple releases some new flagship products, but I don't see that. The way that they've been sort of mildly bumping stuff this year as anything that makes any sense for Apple to spend a lot of money promoting.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think that's why we don't see a lot of we see app ads, but there's no real like you're not.
This dependency on Intel is one of the reasons why Apple is. Why people who watch Apple products frequently wonder how long it's going to take Apple to get manufacturing of its own Mac CPUs under control, whether that's something that's going to happen, because the Mac is so dependent on this one aspect of technology development that Apple has absolutely no control over. And that is, the development of new Intel chips.
Yeah, I mean, and other people have talked about this too. Is you have Intel going lower with stuff like Broadwell, and Apple going higher with stuff like the A7, and there will be an A8, and there will be something after Broadwell. And what will power the next generation of intermediate devices? Like a Mac Pro is probably not going to leave Intel anytime soon. Intel may or may not be successful on a phone anytime soon. But that area in between the tablets and the ultralight computers. Apple has MacBook Airs that run on ARM. They've had them for a while. They've just never needed to pull the trigger. Intel's come in on pretty much on time and on power spec and everything else. And no one has really wanted to move off Qualcomm or Samsung chips in mobile for Intel's platform. It's interesting, Peter. Do you think there's going to be a sea change in where those sort of middle ground computers go?
A sea change in where those middle ground computers go? Well, that's the $64,000.
Like you think we'll see the ARM stuff?
That's the $64,000 question, because that's really where Apple's profit center lies, right? In the machines that, maybe are not the most extreme performing machines, but the most popular machines, because they're available at the most popular prices.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, and I talked about this with Anand, so a little, but I think it's still interesting is you have these two forces at work. For example, the MacBook Pro line has all gone towards Retina, and while the battery life has improved, the improvements haven't been extreme because Retina is so demanding. Where the MacBook Airs have gone towards long battery life, and they've actually surpassed the iOS devices, the iPads, in terms of battery life. Everybody wants now a Retina MacBook Air, but that's going to come at a penalty, a power penalty. So yes, things like Broadwell will help mitigate this. Maybe an ARM version of a MacBook Air that runs iOS would mitigate this. But it's still something you can't have both. You've got to sort of pick, like the iPad 3 and the original iPad 3. You can't sort of have everything you want when you want it.
Yeah, exactly. You can't always get what you want, like the song says.
Does that matter to you? Like if a Retina MacBook Air came, but at the price of a lot of battery life, like if it went from 12 hours down to 6 hours, is that too high a price to pay?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want a machine that's actually going to be less of an experience than what I'm already accustomed to. Yeah, that would be awful.
Yeah, but Retina has a cost.
Retina does have a cost. No, it's not a perfect world. Everything's got a cost.
All right, I'm going to take another quick break, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Betterment. Betterment is an automated investment service. It's built on the idea that investing intelligently should be intuitive, automated, and accessible to everybody. This is one of the things that I am terrible at. I don't think about investment. I have no idea what to do when I invest, and as a consequence, I don't do very much of it. It's sort of like human beings are great at forgetting entirely about their future for the benefit of their present. So what Betterment lets you do is, whether you have $10,000 or $10 million, there's over 36,000 customers already using it. It's user-friendly. They've got smartphone apps. It lets you save time, save money, save tax money. It's just a better way of doing investment. Now, I don't know, Peter, are you an investment guy?
I am not. No, I'm sorry to say.
And that's why I think one of the most interesting things for me about the time that we are in is that if you're not good at something, you almost always have a service available to you that you can go to have it done. Whether it's someone mailing you, $10 worth of quarters for $15, or it's someone willing to do your investments for you, there is an online solution to this now.
That's good. That's good because there's some stuff that I'm just better off not doing.
And I think about it, and I think, like, do I really need to worry about this? And then I realize that the cruel palsy of eld is coming at me like a freight train, and there is no one going to take care of me when I get to that future if I do not take care of myself. So I'm absolutely looking at Betterment.com. I encourage you to take a look. For a limited time, listeners can get up to 6 months of free automated investment management by visiting betterment.com/iMore. Once again, betterment.com/iMore. It is intuitive, automated, accessible investment. I want to thank them for sponsoring the show, and I want to thank you for supporting them. All right, Peter, so I forgot to mention iTunes U. iTunes U is strange to me. Like, I understand how a lot of the pieces at Apple fit together. Even the podcast stuff, Apple doesn't make money off podcasts, but originally it was a good driver for people who wanted to get iPods, because iPods could play podcasts. We obviously make podcasts. Apple has editors for them. They do a good job curating them. Apps, media, that's where Apple makes all their money. iTunes U, Apple had an education event several years ago, and they did textbooks, and they did other stuff, and Apple's good at health. It feels to me like this is one of the areas where Apple just feels like they should give something back.
I agree, and iTunes U is a fantastic resource, for anybody who's got an interest in education, whether it's learning a new topic or professional betterment or whatever. So it's a great ecosystem, and it's something that gets used a lot. I don't think a lot of people understand the depth of content that's available on iTunes U.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's hard is that iTunes U gets used a lot by people who are aware. Like, if you're doing a course, it is great extra material. If you know where to look, if you see a link, if you get a recommendation. But just browsing iTunes U, it's not set up like the other sections. It's not as easy at happenstantial discovery as a lot of other sections of iTunes. And one of the things Apple's doing with iTunes U 2.0 is they're going to allow people to start creating courses on iOS, and that was one of the longest standing knocks against iOS, is that you need a Mac, you need Xcode to develop for it. It is not a real platform until you can develop apps for it on the platform itself. And we're not there yet with obviously with coding, but we're getting there with content creation, and it's interesting to me that iTunes U is sort of spearheading that. Now, if you have an iPad and a Dream, you can share your lesson plans with the world.
Exactly. Teachers can add their own photos and videos into courses, and the bottom line is this is going to help Apple sell more iPads to schools. There's always an upside in it for Apple. There's got to be. They're a company that is in business to make money. But if it actually helps teachers produce content that ends up getting used in their classrooms, then that's a smart thing.
I think it's absolutely a smart thing. I'm interested to see where it goes, though, because right now I don't think people get the value that they could. I know I looked at the Stanford iOS programming course, I think because Lauren Brichter tweeted it. He was in the original one. I would like to see, and there is no money in it for them, but I would like to see something that sort of shows everybody just how much awesome stuff is really in there.
Yeah, it would certainly help.
All right, so sort of the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is one of the bigger things. Well, yeah, it's kind of bigger and it's kind of not bigger because we got software updates for iOS, for OS 10, in a period of time where a lot of people are really interested in the betas for what's coming next. I'll talk about the iOS one in a minute, but I'm curious because you were talking. There are a lot of outstanding issues with Mavericks. One of them is the Wi-Fi problem. One of them is the Mail.app problem. Have you heard anything about what the latest OS 10 update does for people who are suffering from those?
Well, I can only draw off my own anecdotal evidence, and for the past few days I've been running 10.9.4, which just came out this week. It seems to be improved in many respects. I'm not having any Wi-Fi problems like I was having before, so that I'm very grateful for. As far as Mail is concerned, I don't know. I don't know what Apple's got to do with Mail outside of rewrite it from the ground up before it'll be any better than it is now.
When your brief foray into Yosemite, was Mail any different for you?
No. Well, I don't know, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know either because I have on one of my computers, on my MacBook Pro, which basically just stays at home and does editing and stuff, Mail is perfect. I have not a single problem. On my MacBook Air, which has been on both Mavericks and Yosemite, Google Mail just won't show up for long periods of time. It doesn't matter what operating system I'm on that computer, it will be hours behind. And then a whole bunch of mail will come down, and then it'll be fine again, and then it'll stop working again. I can put it back on, it was on Mavericks until recently, now it's on Yosemite, same thing. MacBook Pro works perfectly, and that's the kind of thing that drives me mad because I don't see any sanity to that.
Yeah, no, I don't either. I got nothing to say. It's a mess.
Yeah, so they apparently have built a lot of stuff into Yosemite. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to, this is a beta version, so I don't want to draw any conclusions from that. But it is weird to me that, for example, I have my iPhone, my main iPhone on iOS 8, so I couldn't download this update. I had to go and recharge my iPhone 5 and then stick it on that and play around with it. But is it Schrodinger's updates? These like the interstitial updates are both alive and dead.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, because even reporting them, they came out, and I had to stop and think, why is 7 being updated? We're already on 8. Oh, no, we're not already on 8. I'm running a developer preview.
Yeah, it seems that way sometimes. This is why I'm staying away from developer previews for right now.
The interesting thing is iOS, I think it's 7.1.2 came out. It's mostly fixes. There's a lot of security fixes in there. I do like that Apple is still pushing out. I mean, people complain when a new exploit is found. And most of the time it's lock screen exploits. And lock screen exploits are tricky because a lock screen is designed to lock you out. But people want more and more functionality and convenience on a lock screen. And those are fundamentally opposed to the idea of lock and security. So like you want fast camera access, you want emergency dial, you want to be able to access notification center and control center. All of those things are punching holes, to use Nick Arnott's terminology, in lock screen, and people find exploits. And I turn most. Do you leave anything on the lock screen, Peter? I turn almost everything off that I can.
Yeah, actually, I leave it fully functional.
Because it scares me that someone could just pull up Control Center, put my phone in airplane mode. That bothers me.
Yeah, I'm probably not being smart about it, but I value the convenience. What can I say? I'm a typical user that way, I expect.
Well, at least you have a passcode on it.
This is true. I do have a passcode, and 1111 is very hard to figure out. Oh, I shouldn't have said that out loud, should I?
All right, Peter. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about this week?
Nah, I can't think of anything except on how damn hot it is and how distracted I am by the heat.
Yeah, I apologize for that too. It is way too hot. And tomorrow is July 4th, so I'm guessing the fireworks will make it tolerable.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're expecting a big storm up the coast, so July 4th has kind of been called off. A little bummed out about that, but...
Oh, can you catch it in repeats?
We can catch it in repeats, that's true.
All right.
Belgium defeated our July 4th.
I wanted to make a Minister of Defense joke. Not minister, sorry. You have secretaries in the U.S., not ministers. No wigs are worn in your parliament, sir.
No. We
right, so
bought the funny clothing.
I want to apologize if you're watching the video and Peter and I are literally melting in front of you. It is so hot in here that Google Hangouts is not updating for me. All I'm seeing is static images, which is a little bit disconcerting. So I have no faith that I'm actually live at this point at all either. So we're gonna cut it a little bit short. We'll make it up to you next time, hopefully when Peter and I have our environmental conditions, our climatology regulated.
A little bit better, yeah, indeed.
All right, so Peter, if people want to find you on Twitter, if they want to follow your work, where can they go?
They can go to iMore.com or on Twitter at Flarg, F-L-A-R-G-H.
Nice, and you can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore. Just this very week, we completed the Nitin Ganatra trilogy on debug. So if you ever wanted to know, for example, why there was no MMS on the original iPhone, why there was no copy-paste, why it uses UIKit instead of AppKit, Nitin was director of iOS apps at Apple, one of the original people that worked on the iPhone prototypes and on the release, and he was there until about iOS 5.1, I think. He worked on the iPad, and he was incredibly generous with sharing a ton of that history and all those stories with us. So again, I consider it one of the most important cultural, technological events of the last decade, and I can't hear enough about it. So I urge you to go to imore.com/debug, give it a listen, because it sort of explains a lot of how Apple thinks about things, which isn't always very obvious from the outside. Peter, I want to wish you an awesome July 4th.
Thank you, and happy belated Canada Day to you and to all of our Canadian listeners.
Thank you. We stood on guard for thee. And I want to thank Igloo once again for sponsoring the show. They have their brand new task management feature. It is part of their Unicorn update. It's free for all existing Igloo customers. And if you're not an Igloo customer and you want to become an Igloo customer, you want to learn all about it, just go to igloosoftware.com/iMore. Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rene. Talk to you next week.
Thank you, chat room. Have a good week.